So hello everybody. Today this is our fifth parenting webinar series, and this is Ismail. I am the Chief Education Officer of TechDev Academy and one of the co-founders. I am also an Associate Professor of STEM Education. So I would like to introduce first our CEO, Murat. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, this is Murat. I'm the CEO of the company, and since COVID started, we've been doing a lot of educational activities, virtual camps, on-site camps. We used to do a lot in more than technological areas, and then we moved to online, and we extended our programs. We have really original programs. We're starting a mentorship program. Totally online mentorship program. We are pairing the people from Silicon Valley's engineer scientists with the high school students. And we have also entrepreneurship program. We have a few others as well. And since COVID started, we just increased our programs and educational activities like this one, and trying to help parents to have a better ways to get through that process. Hopefully this will help. I hope you enjoyed today's event.
Thank you, Murat. Next, I would like to introduce our Chief Product Officer, May. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, sure. Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for joining us today. We are so excited to host such a unique and educational webinar. Let me introduce first myself and then the company. I am the co-founder and Chief Product Officer of TechDev Academy. And we are, as a TechDev Academy, a Silicon Valley-based startup. And our goal is to provide your kids tech training in a variety of topics for like entrepreneurship, robotics, game development, and programming, including Scratch, Unity, Roblox, Python, C#, C++, and many others. Especially after COVID-19 started, we organized over 50 free workshops, lectures, and webinars just like this one to serve the community during this difficult time. And we are so proud and happy to say that thanks to those free workshops, lectures, and webinars, we have reached over 10,000 students and parents. And we definitely will continue to do so. In TechDev Academy, we have also many virtual bootcamps available for game development, programming, such as Roblox, Minecraft World Designer, C# for coding games, and several others. Our camps is targeting to improve your kids' confidence, creativity, team working skills, and such others. And we keep our class size limited to 5 students. We bring coding experience to your kids while having fun. We also provide mentorship and additional support during and after the camps via Google Classrooms. Also, I want to share such an exciting news today. We have opened the waiting list applications for our comprehensive entrepreneurship and mentorship programs that designed to build entrepreneurship skills with hands-on projects and work with real-world research experiences with top-ranking mentors from Silicon Valley. As a token of appreciation, we are providing $150 discount for the webinar participants only for today. I will share the details on chat. That's all I want to share today. Again, thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope we all learn such great things from this webinar. That's all, Ismail.
Thank you, May. And it's a nice place you are there. So it's like summer.
Yeah, I'm nearby a lake.
Right.
It's such great, yeah.
Cool. And today we are going to host Dr. John Falk. Welcome, John. Could you introduce yourself? And then we can start.
Sure, I'll introduce myself. I'm John Falk. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Learning and Innovation. I'm also an emeritus professor as the Sea Grant Professor for free choice learning at Oregon State University, and I'm still an emeritus at Oregon State. I've spent way too many years of my life, going on 50 years, dare I say, trying to understand how people learn, where people learn, why people learn across their lifespan. And that's actually what I'm going to be talking about today. And so, if I might, without further ado, I will just launch into this talk, which I've titled Back to the Future, Learning in the 21st Century. And so, for hundreds of thousands of years, literally since the beginning of humanity, humans have always learned and been driven by learning, but learning was largely driven by each individual interests and needs. It was active. It was a function of observing, doing, and practicing. To the extent that it was facilitated by other humans, which of course all learning is, it was not taught as much as mentored by skilled practitioners. And through the vast majority of human history, success in learning was determined by competent performance. And then about 150 years ago, things changed. All of a sudden, we decided that learning should become institutionalized and professionalized. And the goals of learning were no longer determined by the individual, but by others, the experts, the people like Ismail and myself who sit around in ivory towers in the academy and decide that we know what people should learn. And increasingly, rather than active, learning became passive, driven by lectures and textbooks. And again, success was determined not by performance in the real world, but by artificial tests. But I am here to tell you today that over the next 50 years, learning is going to change, and it's going to become much more like the learning that people for most of human history have done. Learning is going to be, once again, like it used to be. So let me give you an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about when people learn, why people learn, where people learn.
Can I ask a quick question, John?
Sure.
So do you think it's a loop, like we go on like again and again?
Well, it's going to look different, but in terms of those key factors that I outlined earlier, that's how it's going to change. Obviously, we're not going to be sitting around the campfire talking about what we did today, and children are not going to be running around the village practicing with bows and arrows. But increasingly, we're going to find that people are learning by mentoring. People are learning by driven primarily by their own needs and interests and their own requirements rather than by experts. And learning is increasingly going to become competency-based as opposed to diploma-based. Those are the trends that I'm talking about. And I make a note here, and actually I should say, I'm going to focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. But what I have to say applies to virtually any topic. So, when do people learn? So here's some big picture in the 21st century. Learning truly is lifelong, and people are learning every minute of every day, every year of their life. And despite the fact that we put so much emphasis on formal education, the reality is the average adult today, by the time of their death, will have spent less than 3% of their life in any formal instruction. Even kids spend less than 20% of their day in a formal classroom. The vast majority of our time is spent outside of that. More importantly, the traditional gatekeepers of knowledge, schools, libraries, governments, no longer are in total control because of these things. All of a sudden, everybody has access to knowledge and information in a way that historically they didn't have. And as a consequence, the boundaries between when, why, and where we learn are actually rapidly disappearing. So let me give you sort of a sense of what this looks like. So imagine there's a life space, 70 plus years of life. You know, here are your waking hours, 7 in the morning to 11 at night, 12 months out of the year. And inside that life space, there's this box. And in fact, even that box is disproportionately large to reality. And if you're lucky enough to go to college, okay, we'll add another sliver. But all the rest of that box is filled with learning opportunities and time spent learning. And that's what we're talking about here today, is the fact that what happens in that other space is becoming increasingly important. So why do people learn? And this is disproportionately based on research that my colleagues and I have done in terms of random surveys of people, but it's confirmed by lots of other research going on around the country. First and foremost, the primary reason people learn and the primary amount of time they spend learning is to satisfy their own personal curiosity and interest. Second is on-the-job experience and training. This is over a lifetime. Third is a hobby to support the needs of others, children, significant others, to satisfy a specific need or problem. So for example, if your roof is leaking, you all of a sudden figure, I guess I need to know something about roofing. If your significant other becomes ill, if you have a child that becomes ill, you may not know much about leukemia, but if your child is diagnosed with leukemia, overnight you'll become an expert in leukemia, childhood leukemia. And then at the very bottom of the list, even though this is what we assume is the focus of learning, the least important reason, the least time people spend learning over their lifetime is for school or to prepare for a career. That's a tiny sliver of actual investment in learning over a lifetime. The fact is that most people learn most of what they know through what we call free choice learning, where they have some measure of control over what, where, when, why, and with whom they learn. So learning, as I'm suggesting, doesn't just happen in a single place. Clearly, some learning happens in school, but it also happens when watching television shows like Mythbusters, reading magazines or newspapers, playing online games, while on vacation or during leisure time. You learn an awful lot from parents and family. You learn through the workplace. You learn through after-school programs like 4-H. Clearly, the internet is transforming how and where we learn. We learn through our hobbies. We learn through books. And of course, we learn through going to places like museums or participating in after-school programs. And all of these things contribute. All of these are part of the broader learning infrastructure or ecosystem of learning. Which brings up the question, where do people learn? So as we sit here today, there's broad public agreement that people learn in and out of school. Nobody would dispute that. Even the most hardcore school educator would agree that people learn outside of school as well as in school. But there's no agreement on the relative contributions of the various sources. But a number of recent studies help to clarify this issue. Of course, the background is we come from a society because of that 150-year history that we've been living through, where we assume that most people learn most of what's important in school, including things like history, language, and of course, STEM. But is that really true? Actually, maybe not. So let's talk about schooling. So there was a classic series of studies that were done over the last 20 years. And the goal of these studies originally were designed to try and figure out what is the relative consequence of good schools versus bad schools. And so the original work was done in the Washington, D.C. area, more specifically in the Baltimore area. And there were a whole set of schools in suburban Maryland, which were considered quote unquote good schools. And then there were a whole bunch of schools in inner city Baltimore that were considered bad schools. The roof was falling in, kids did poorly on tests and all that stuff. So they started tracking longitudinally kids as they entered into first grade. Ultimately, they tracked them through high school over 12 years. And what they found was as kids entered first grade, there was already a gap, and these were reading scores. There was already a gap in reading ability between the 5-year-olds who entered first grade in the suburban, quote unquote, good schools and in the urban, quote unquote, bad schools. But an amazing thing happened as they studied them over the course of the school year. Over the course of the school year, both groups increased their reading ability. In fact, there was no significant difference in the changes in reading ability between the two. In fact, as you can see, the gap between them persisted, but it didn't grow. Kids didn't become better readers, significantly better readers in good schools as opposed to bad schools. They both became better readers at a constant level. And then an amazing thing happened. Summer came. And over the course of the summer, statistically, the kids from poorer means stayed about the same or slightly declined, whereas the kids who lived in more affluent environments continued to increase, not as steeply as they did when they were in school. Again, this is about reading. But the gap had increased by the time they got into second grade. And this exact same pattern happened year after year after year. There was no difference between performance between good schools and bad schools, but every year the gap widened over the summer. Now, of course, the school people interpreted this, well, clearly we must keep kids in school year round. But if you kept kids in school year round, these gaps would not close because schooling didn't close the gaps. But what was clearly going on was that something was going on in the summer. And it was about what happened outside of school that was really critical in determining the ultimate gap between advantaged kids and disadvantaged kids. This was eye-opening. So these days now, when we collect data, like the National Assessment of Educational Progress, they've added questions in recent years to try and understand, do kids participate in out-of-school experiences? And time after time, what emerges that those kids who participate in out-of-school experiences, like going to museums, zoos, or aquariums, outside of a school field trip, score significantly better on the NAEP. This is in science. How much do you do work, science-related things other than homework at home? If you do yes, then you do significantly better than those who don't do that. Technology and engineering, same thing. Those who do participate in out-of-school experiences do significantly better than kids who never do technology and engineering in school. In fact, what is really interesting is that in this 2014 NAEP assessment, what is considered competence on the NAEP is a score of over 150. And so what we're finding is that only the kids who are doing these kinds of technology and engineering experiences out of school frequently are actually rated as competent. Everybody else who doesn't do these things regularly are actually technologically and engineeringly incompetent. So in a recent study that my colleagues and I did, we tried to say, what is the relative contribution of different kinds of experiences to contributing to kids and adults STEM literacy, their interests, their knowledge. And we looked at nearly 1,500 youth and over 3,000 adults in 3 urban areas, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and Phoenix. This was conducted by random surveys. And we tried to compare the relationship of kids' interest and perceptions of their interest, both past and present, as a function of science classes in school, uses of science centers, uses of the internet, again, not for school, watching television at home, not for school, reading books and magazines. And what we found is that in terms of past performance, two of these significantly contributed to middle school kids having significant interest in science. One of them was the quality of the experiences they had at science centers when they were in elementary school, and the frequency and quality of experiences they had reading while they were in elementary school. There was no significant correlation between using the internet, watching television, or school classes on their middle school science interest. By middle school, internet became significantly important, science center experiences became significantly important, schooling became significantly important, reading became less important, TV remained unimportant significantly. And then we look at adults. And these are adults reflecting back on their experiences that they had in middle school. And again, this is not whether you had those experiences or not, but whether you perceive these experiences as quality experiences. And what we found that if you perceive that you had quality out of school reading experiences in science, quality science center experiences as a kid in science, that significantly correlated with being a science interested adult. Whereas watching TV and your school experiences had no correlation with becoming a science interested adult. And then finally, current adult. So the bottom line from this is, does this mean that none of these experiences makes a difference? No, all these experiences made a difference. But it certainly doesn't suggest that the place where people learn to become science interested adults is in school. It's primarily coming from out of school. So backing this up, here was another study. This was the relative contribution of science learning resources to, again, long-term science learning, knowledge, science literacy in LA adults. And this was, again, a random telephone survey representative of the entire population of Los Angeles. And there's a whole bunch of things here, and they're all statistically significant. So whether adults read books, magazines, and newspapers related to science, not for school, whether, oops, I had to move my thing here so I could see what's underneath my slide. Damn. Apologies. Back one more. Using the internet. Gender made a difference, income made a difference, highest level of education made a difference. Whether you worked in a STEM career or not made a difference. So did whether you read books and magazines or newspapers as a child or participated. Again, all of these things were significant, but when we factored all this together and did a regression, we created a formal education. These are all quantitative measures. So the total amount of formal education you had, the total number of childhood free choice learning experiences you had, workplace, privilege, which is again, race, ethnicity, gender, income, and then what you did as an adult. All of these made a difference. But as you can see, that formal education, the amount of formal education you had contributed 17% of the variance, was exactly the same as the amount of time spent doing things outside of school, contributed the same amount to the variance of whether adults were science literate as did formal education. Clearly, privilege made a difference, being in the workplace, and what you did as an adult. Can you conclude from this that schools are unimportant? No, obviously they're statistically significant, but you cannot conclude from this that schools are the single most important. And that's despite the fact that as a nation, For every dollar we spend on education in this country, 99 cents of every dollar goes to formal education. 1% goes to out-of-school education, the kind of stuff that TechDev is doing. But clearly, formal education is not delivering 99% of the value. That you could conclude from this evidence. And what about parents? Well, it turns out parents make a difference too. So these are math scores, again, at the National Assessment of Educational Progress. These are science scores. And all you have to do to look at this is when their parental involvement is heavy on a regular basis, kids do significantly better than if there's hardly any parental involvement. That's in math, that's in science. In fact, a series of studies have shown that parental support for learning is the single greatest contributor to both children's success in school and, more importantly, and their success in later life. So one more study I'm going to share with you. This is a study that my colleagues and I have been doing for over a decade in the Portland area, where we've been looking at a low-income area and looking at interest in STEM. And what you can see is that for all kids, STEM, as has been shown worldwide, generally declines. Interest in STEM generally declines from 5th grade through 8th grade. But how much it declines is what is the issue. And it turns out if there's a lot of parental support, that decline is marginal. If they have support from significant other adults, it also declines, but not as much. And what you do outside of school also makes a difference. And in fact, those factors are the single best predictors of whether kids will have declines or not. So for the kids who show less decline, they have more parental support, they have other significant adults supporting them, they are involved in out-of-school experiences. So what are the key research takeaways? The main reason that people learn, including children, is because they're curious and they're seeking to fulfill personal needs and interests. The other key takeaway is that people learn all the time. Learning is never ending and cumulative. So it doesn't matter whether it's in school or out of school. Kids, adults are learning all the time, and all of these things contribute to what people know and what they take away, and it is a significant contributor to interest, which of course drives future learning. And a third key takeaway is that parental involvement and support, particularly of children's interests, are critical. That without parental support, which declines in the middle school years, which is what I meant to show you, that children's interest wanes. Without being supported in their interest wanes, and that adults, parents can and do make a difference. So that brings us to the final question. So what are the implications for parents? What can we learn from all this research? Well, to begin with, we need to appreciate there is not one pillar to supporting kids' education, but 4 pillars, and they're co-equal pillars. Clearly, formal education is important. I am not here to tell you that what happens in school is unimportant. But again, what happens in school at the moment is oversold. That what happens at home in the family is just, if not more important than what happens in school. So too is what happens outside of school, informal experiences, going to museums and science centers, having opportunities to take extracurricular classes. These are vitally important to supporting kids' interests. And then finally, and this becomes increasingly true as kids get older into the middle school and high school years, they need mentors, they need adult supports. It may not be a parent. It doesn't have to be a parent, but a parent can facilitate helping find for your child someone who is interested and can support their particular interests. It's ironic that in some areas, most notably in sports, and in classical music, and in martial arts, those are the three areas in America where a kid can find a mentor to help coach them and have them move from being a novice to an expert. You go to your local youth soccer league, and if you're really good at the youth soccer league, then you can participate in an advanced soccer camp for the kids who get better. And the kids who are even better, then they're coached and mentored, become even better soccer players through high school and on into college. And then ultimately, if they're really good, into professional life. There are supports every step of the way. There's a similar network in the martial arts. And there's a similar network in classical music. There isn't a single classical musician who is a total autodidact. They all have been supported throughout their career, every step of the way, by mentors who help them become better musicians. We have no such system, for example, in STEM. If you're interested in STEM, you're on your own. You go to a science center and get all excited about STEM. Well, what do you do next? You're on your own. If you go to these classes that are being offered by TechDev, that's great. You get excited about coding. Well, unless we create a system for helping kids every step of the way, they're on their own. And so that falls increasingly to adults to help be the guides through the ecosystem, to find the signposts. Because currently our STEM learning ecosystem is not signposted for kids. So how can parents make a difference? They need to support children's interests. They need to accept the fact that what kids are interested in is just as important as what school says kids should be interested in. Kids have interests, support those interests. You need to support out-of-school learning. As I've said repeatedly in this talk, what happens out of school is just as important as what happens in school. Actually, you need to provide a role model for curiosity, persistence, and lifelong learning. Kids need to grow up and believe and see from the adults who surround them that learning is not just something that happens in school. It is not just something that happens for a job, but it's something that the significant adults in your life value. And they too learn across their lifespan. And so kids grow up believing that, oh, I'll be just like my parents, whether they do that consciously or unconsciously. So all parents need to become lifelong learners and to model that for their kids. And then finally, importantly, don't forget to let children fail. Persistence, grit, is ultimately as important as anything else in determining future success in life. And all of us fail, but we have to learn to fail, get up, and try again. So as Abraham Lincoln most famously quipped, the only failure I've ever had is the one I didn't learn from. So we need to accept that failure is not a bad thing. Failure is part of life. And so we need to support our kids in terms of embracing failure, getting ourselves up, and trying again, because that's what ultimately will determine their long-term success in life. So the bottom line, over the next 50 years, learning will increasingly come to more closely resemble the roots of human learning. We're going to be learning all the time. We're going to be learning driven by our own needs. We're going to be looking for mentors who can help us support our learning. And we're going to be looking for ways to support that learning through competency-based as opposed to artificial diplomas and certificates and tests like that. We can resist this changing reality, or we can accept it and embrace it. And I suggest that we all embrace the past and make it our future. So thanks. And if you have any desire to get back in touch with me, that's how you can do it. I'm happy to accept emails. You can try and call me or text me, see how that works. I answer my phone once a day and look at my texts once a day, but I attend to my emails. So that's probably the best way to reach me.
Cool. Thanks very much, John.
Sure.
So it was really eye-opening for many parents because, many parents were concerned about their kids, oh, my kids are, missing the school, like face-to-face education, what I am going to do or something like that they are thinking. So I think this was an eye-opening talk for them. And also, I didn't want to interrupt. We have questions in the question and answers section. If you want to check that.
Okay, let me open up the chat.
From our audience. So I would like to remind our audience that they can, type their questions if they have further questions.
Okay, so let me give a chance to see if I can answer some of these questions. So this was a question from Mike.
Sure.
What do you think your ideal learning environment if all conditions are met? Well, ultimately, the ideal learning environment is an environment that authentically supports the questions that are being asked. The problem with much of what's happened in the last 150 years in education, formal education, is we've made it very abstract as opposed to real life. And we have ignored the fact that so much of how and what we learn is nonverbal. And we learn from, and this is one of the things, and all of us who've been on Zoom chats lately can attest to this. We're having this conversation. In theory, we're looking at people, and yet we're constantly interrupting each other as people are starting to talk. And then we apologize. Oh, I didn't realize you were about to talk. Well, why didn't we know that people were going to talk? Because in normal conversation, that rarely happens face to face. And that's because we're picking up all these nonverbal cues, which are not as easy to pick up, even when we're watching a Zoom. But imagine how impoverished the learning experience is when all we're doing is reading a textbook or listening to a lecture, as opposed to actually being able to be immersed in a real life learning experience. And then the other thing that makes learning ideal is choice and control. As humans, we are predisposed to want to control the learning we do. It's the old notion, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Well, the same is true of learning. You can present all kinds of stuff. You can try and force people to learn, but ultimately people learn what they want to learn, and people learn what they want to learn because of their perceived needs. And so you can artificially try and make learning fun. You can artificially try and make learning relevant. But the learning that is most fun and most relevant is the learning that we ourselves believe is relevant. And so ultimately, it's all about trying to help foster kids being in environments and contexts that are as authentic as possible, where they are solving real problems that they perceive as real and relevant. And that can happen indoors, that can happen outdoors, that can happen at a camp, it can happen at a class, it can even happen in the classroom if we allow it to happen, if we allow it to be bubbling up from the needs and interests of the learner, as opposed to always being imposed top down from some authority. So on to Melissa's question. Do you think COVID will change the whole education dynamics and new learning methods? Well, the short answer is yes, but I'm not clairvoyant. I don't know exactly how. There's a lot of inertia in the system, and I have never been one to underestimate inertia, and that I think there'll be a lot of pressure to try and get things, quote unquote, back to the way they are. What I will say is that what the current COVID situation has revealed for those who are willing to see it revealed is that the crisis of having kids in classrooms at the moment is not actually ultimately related to learning. It is because we have conflated schooling with social service. Much as many of the problems with the way we currently handle policing in the country, where we expect our police to actually act as social service agents and deal with people with mental problems, people with economic problems like homelessness or poverty. All of that gets dumped on the police, who are actually not well trained to deal with that. They're trained to deal with crime. Public school teachers are asked to deal with issues related to poverty, with again, public health issues, with issues about lack of nutrition. And of course, they're expected to be babysitters, so parents can go to work. So we need to disentangle the question of education from the question of social service. And if we do that, then we'll find that the need for formal education diminishes, and the need for excellent daycare increases, and the need to use all the educational resources in the community to serve both the education and social service benefits that society requires will change. But until we address those issues, I don't see any big changes in the way the formal education establishment deals with education. Okay. Vignesh, there are schools oops, where'd that go? So this is a question from Lynn. Do you think income disparity will be increased because of remote learning? I suspect that currently the lack of access to broadband is a decided handicap to those who are under-resourced, impoverished. And so absolutely, as we become to depend more and more on remote learning, then that is going to have a disproportionate impact on those in the population, children and adults, who don't have access to technology. And so that needs to be a problem that we address and we solve. Otherwise, those gaps, like that study in Baltimore that I showed, those disparities are going to grow.
And I can read you Vignesh's question.
Okay, thank you.
There are schools in Bay Area which has an individualized curriculum.
Yes.
So do you think it's better like that? Vignesh asks.
Well, again, do I think there are ways to make schools better? Absolutely. And having a more individualized curriculum is one way to do that. And certainly if we make the school education more personalized and more individualized, that will make a huge difference. But if you think the problem of 21st century education can only be solved by schools, and you haven't heard what I've been saying, that we can only make incremental differences by improving schools. If we want to make significant differences in public education, then we need to realize that the words learning, education, and school are not synonyms, never have been, increasingly no more are. That we need to support learning everywhere, not just in school. Yes, we can and should make schools better, but the needs of the 21st century will not be solved solely by improving schools. If we could make schools perfect miraculously overnight, we would not see wide-scale changes in the quality of science literacy, technology literacy, or any other literacy we think is important. We would see incremental improvements. The only way we will significantly change the quality of education in the US and nationwide and worldwide is to embrace a more decentralized and system that recognizes that people need to and do learn every minute of every day of their lives. Schooling is not set up to do that. Again, it represents 18% of the day of a kid. It represents 3% of the life over the lifetime of an adult. We need to invest in the other 97% of the time that people are awake and trying to learn if we are going to fundamentally change education.
Yeah, I believe that parents like schools because, kids spend a lot of time over there while their parents are working. That's why it's like child care center.
Yes.
Yeah, one of the big reasons, I guess.
So this is a great question by an anonymous attendee. So what if your child's primary interest is becoming a YouTube influencer gamer, and that is how they want to spend their non-game screen time? Additionally, resulting in wanting to spend as much time on screens as possible. While during distance learning, they prioritize trying to watch YouTube gamers whenever they can get away with it, ignoring classes. How to balance and support this interest? Is this interest in the criteria you were mentioning? Can it be any interest? How about rally car driver and sports car and so on and on and on? Well, absolutely. When I was a kid, I wanted to become an NBA basketball player, despite the fact that I was always the shortest kid in my class. And so was that gonna happen? No, but yet, wouldn't it have been great if my parents would have been a little more supportive of my basketball playing, and at the same time encouraged me to explore other things that, as a wise adult, they could see that probably my future was not going to be in the NBA. But that's okay. This is about failure, right? This is about saying, give it a try, and you may discover that you're not as good as you think you are, or there are things that may not work out for you, and that let's at least hedge our bets. Let's find some additional interests, and let me, give this a shot. You might discover that you like that too, and you may even have a talent for it, because ultimately the things that we persist in interest, what the research on interest suggests is that actually you have to be successful to have persistence in interest. There's a lot of peer pressure to want to be interested in lots of things. And in the culture, we get a lot of vibes about what is important. But ultimately, most of us pick up the cues about whether we're actually any good at what we do. And as we discover that our talents may lay elsewhere, then normal people start losing interest in the things that we're not so good in and start persisting in the things that we are good in. But of course, we have to have the options available. So there's not an easy way to do this, but it's sort of gently nudging and saying, I understand you want to do that, but give this a try too. Because actually, I think you'd be really, really good at this. And lo and behold, you might discover that this is just as much fun as being a gamer. And the reality is sometimes, again, kids have to fail in order to discover that maybe gaming, maybe I'm not destined to be a YouTube gamer. Then again, maybe they are. But again, I don't have any simple pat answers for this. And I understand that there are all kinds of social pressures that push kids into different directions, and their aspirations may not seem realistic. But again, I can assure you that what isn't going to be successful is just to flat out say, no, that's not what you will spend your time doing or should spend your time doing. You need to think about this more as an asset-based than a deficit-based. So how can we support the things they are good at that might move them in other directions, as opposed to merely try and tell them what they're shouldn't be doing because they don't think it's successful. So, question from Matt. It means educating parents is very important. Do you know the resources for parents? What an excellent question. I will tell you the short answer is that as a society, we have not been very good at supporting parents in the critical role they need to do to be quality educators. It's not that there aren't tons and tons of books and programs out there supporting educators, but if we believe the data that I've presented today, then we have not done a very good job. We have not done very well at supporting parents, at being the kinds of supportive parents they need. And clearly there's a need for more programs that support parents. And we should be investing as much resource, to be honest, in helping parents know how to be good parents as we currently support in trying to help kids be good learning kids. That's not happening. So I wish I could give you the answers to that question, but I can't, other than to say it's the right question to be asking, but unfortunately I don't have the right answer to give you at this point. So here's a question from Elaine. My son is always changing interests, never sticking to anything. How do you choose what to support? It gets costly, always changing. How do we figure out that support, that direction? Well, actually, Elaine, the first question I have to ask is, how old is your son? Because this is partially developmental. And that 13. Well, the good news is he should grow out of this soon. That this is actually normal for kids. And that what the research suggests is that when, for example, I did this sort of crowdsourcing research, which over the last 20 years, I've been asking people to talk to their friends and neighbors and ask them about what are the topics that you, particularly in science or technology, what are the topics that you are sort of know something about, know as much or more than most people. So i.e. I'm a particularly good cook, I'm a particularly good gardener, I know a lot about auto mechanics, how engines work and all that kind of stuff. So there are all those answers. And then you ask the question, so when did you first become really interested and passionate about this? And all the answers converge around between the ages of 13 and 19. So over the next half dozen years, your son is going to find something that, apropos to an earlier comment, they start seeing that they can actually be good at and get a lot of reinforcement for. And all of a sudden they're going to discover that that's an area that I really should stick with because I'm getting a lot of positive reinforcement. When I do this, I actually feel good about myself. And people think that I'm competent. And that's the virtuous cycle that makes somebody become better and better at something. So be patient, it's gonna happen. And so in the short term, letting your child, your son explore those options is a good thing. And he may come back to them, or he may discover something else, or he may discover something new that all of a sudden lights a fire under him, and off he'll go. So be patient, it's gonna come. So to have time for maybe one more of these. Yeah, no, I think we're good. Thank you all.
Thank you. That was very great, inspiring. I like that. I mean, we are struggling as parents, and we have 8 and 11, and all these problems we have, and it's good. So something really striking me that from that conversation, we should be teaching ourselves as much as the teachers.
Yes.
Helping kids. That's a difficult part.
Yes, it is. And don't get me wrong. I understand the world in which parents live today, where they're getting all these pressures from work, from schools, but you need to tough it out and believe that your kids, as long as they're spending their time being curious and doing things, they are not going to suffer. There is no evidence that they will be eternally crippled by having to be home and learning at home. That's a myth. They're going to do fine as long as they, particularly parents with means, who have the ability to allow kids to be online, to have books, to be engaged, to go outdoors. Your kids are going to do just fine. It's a pain for you, but they're going to do just fine. And in fact, history may judge they do better than they would have done if they'd been in school all this time.
Thank you, John. It's very shocking for me to hear that 99% of the money spent for education goes to formal education only.
Yes, yes.
So I think, we should support informal education more.
Yeah, so my radical suggestion is if we took all those funds and stripped 1% away from formal education, they would scream and shout, but they would probably hardly miss 1%. And then we took that 1% and invested it in everything else. All of a sudden, we would double the investment in out-of-school education. And I would be willing to bet that 1% investment of all that resource, but doubling the investment in out-of-school, there would be a significant, highly significant bump, certainly far more of a bump than if we increase the investment in formal education by another 1%. So if you want to be cost effective, that's how it's just cost effectively reforming public education. Well,
that's a great suggestion.
On that radical note, I will bow out and thank everybody for joining in, and thank you for inviting me to speak.